The Sunken City by Mary Frary and Charles Maurice. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Alyahya. The Sunken City. There was once, we are told, a fine tract of land where now rolls the waves of the Zuyder Zee. On the very spot where now the fishermen anchor their boats and fish, there stood a beautiful city. It was protected from the sea by great dikes. The name of the city was Tsarevich, and the people who lived there were very wealthy. Some of them were so wealthy that they laid their great halls with floors of gold and silver. But in spite of their wealth, they were selfish, thoughtless, and hard-hearted. For the poor people they cared nothing. The richest person among them was a maiden lady. She had palaces, farms, ships, and counting houses, everything that one could desire. But she thought of nothing except how she might increase her store. With this in mind, she one day summoned the captain of her largest vessel. When he came, she bade him sail away to procure a cargo of the most precious things of earth, and to return within the year. Not knowing exactly what she wished, the captain questioned her, but she simply repeated her order and sent him away at once. The captain set sail from Tsarevich without knowing where he was going. After leaving the harbor, he called his officers together and asked their advice. Each had a different opinion as to what were the most precious things of earth. The captain was plunged into greater depth than ever. He thought over the question for many long hours, smoking his pipe and stretching his head. At last he said to himself that nothing could be more precious than wheat, which is the staff of life. Accordingly, he purchased a cargo of grain and returned happily to his native town, arriving long before the year had passed. The Haiti lady had, in the meantime, told all her friends that her vessel had gone in search of the most precious thing of earth. She would not tell her closest friend what that most precious thing might be. So everybody was very curious. When one day her captain appeared suddenly before her and told her that he had brought a cargo of wheat, her pride vanished. She flew into a terrible rage and commanded that every kernel be cast into the sea at once. The captain was shocked at this order and pleaded with her to allow him to give the wheat to the poor. She repeated her command. "I will come down to the port myself," she said, "to make sure that every kernel is cast into the sea." The captain made his way sadly back to his vessel. As he did so, he met several beggars by the way and told them that a cargo of wheat was to be cast into the sea. By the time the lady reached the dock, the poor had gathered there from all parts of the city, hoping to secure some of the grain. When the lady approached, many imploring hands were extended toward her, but all was in vain. Angry and proud, she made the sailors cast all the wheat into the sea. The captain, powerless to prevent this sinful waste, looked on in quiet rage. When the last kernel had disappeared beneath the water, he turned to his Haiti mistress. "As surely as there is God above us," he exclaimed, "you will be punished for this sin. The time will come when you, the wealthiest person in Tsarevich, will long for a few handfuls of this wasted wheat." The lady listened to his words in Haiti silence. When he had finished, she took a costly ring from her delicate hand and cast it into the sea. "When this ring comes back to me," she said, "I will believe what you say and fear that I may come to want." A few hours afterward, the lady's cook was preparing dinner for her. He was opening a large fish which had just been brought from the sea, when to his surprise his eyes fell upon the costly ring. He immediately sent it to his proud mistress. When she recognized it, she turned very pale. Shortly afterward there came a report that one of her counting houses had been ruined, and another report of disaster came that same evening. All her counting houses were ruined. Her fleet had been destroyed at sea. Her palaces were burning, and her farms were laid waste by storms. In a few hours, everything that she had possessed was stripped from her. The palace in which she lived burned down during the night, and she barely escaped with her life. Now she was desolate. Indeed, the rich people of the city cared nothing for her now that her money was all gone. The poor people whom she had treated with contempt allowed her to die of hunger and cold in a miserable shed. The city of Stavern did not profit by the sad end of the haughty lady. The rich people continued to enjoy life and to neglect the poor. It did not matter to them what happened to their wretched fellow creatures. They, like the haughty lady, were truly selfish. As time went on, the sand began to increase in the port, so that it soon was impossible for ships to come to anchor. It grew worse and worse. The waves washed the sand up until a great sandbar rose above the water, and all further commerce was stopped. It was not long before the sandbank was covered with little green blades. The people gazed upon it in surprise. "It is the lady's sand, for it is the wheat that she had cast into the sea that is growing there." The wheat grew very rapidly, but bore no fruit. It did not matter to the rich, even if traffic had ceased. They did not suffer. The poor, however, were greatly distressed, for they now had nothing to do. They besought help from the rich, but their prayers fell upon deaf ears. Not long afterward, a little leak was discovered in the dike which protected the city. Through this, the sea water crept into the city reservoir, spoiling all the drinking water. The rich people only laughed, saying that they would drink champagne, since water was not to be had. But what were the poor to do? They crowded around the gates of the rich, imploring a sup of beer, but were rudely driven away. "It would be a good thing," said the rich, "if these wretched creatures should actually die. Of what use are they to themselves or to anyone else?" The rich of Stavern had had their last chance to do good. The very same night when the revellers had returned to sleep, the sea broke down the weakened dikes. Bursting in, it covered up the whole town. Over the spot where Stavern once stood, the waves now glitter in the bright sunlight, or plunge and dash when the cold winds come sweeping in from the sea. Boatmen came rowing up from the desolate little fishing town, which now bears the name of the ancient city. When the waters are smooth, they rest upon their oars to point out far beneath them the spires and turrets and palaces of Stavern. The streets of the old town, as it lies beneath the wave, once so populous, are deserted. The marketplace is empty. No sound is to be heard except when some inquiring fish, swimming through the belfries, strikes one of the bells with his tail. Then there is heard a sad sound which seems to be tolling the knell of the sunken city. End of the Sunken City.
The Meeting of the Star Lovers. In Fairy World, Stories from the Wonder Lore of Japan by William Elliott Griffiths. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Colleen McMahon. The Meeting of the Star Lovers. One of the greatest days in the calendar of old Japan was the 7th of July, or, as the Japanese people put it, the 7th day of the 7th month. It was a vermilion day in the almanacs, to which every child looked forward with eyes sparkling, hands clapping, and fingers counting, as each night rolled the time nearer. All manner of fruits and other eatable vegetables were prepared, and cakes baked in the household. The boys plucked bamboo stalks and strung on their branches bright-colored ribbons, tinkling bells, and long streamers of paper, on which poetry was written. On this night, mothers hoped for wealth, happiness, good children, and wisdom. The girls made a wish that they might become skilled in needlework. Only one wish a year, however, could be made. So, if anyone wanted several things, health, wealth, skill in needlework, wisdom, etc., they must wait many years before all the favors could be granted. Above all things, rainy weather was not desired. It was a good sign when a spider spun his web over a melon, or, if put in a square box, he should weave a circular web. Now, the cause of all this preparation was that on the 7th of July, the herd boy star and the spinning maiden star crossed the Milky Way to meet each other. These are the stars which we call Capricornus and Alpha Lyra. These stars that shine and glitter so far up in the zenith are the boy with an ox and the girl with a shuttle, about whom the story runs as follows. On the banks of the silver river of heaven, which we call the Milky Way, there lived a beautiful maiden, who was the daughter of the sun. Her name was Shokujo. She did not care for games or play like her companions, and thinking nothing of vain display, wore only the simplest of dress. Yet she was very diligent and made many garments for others. Indeed, so busy was she that all called her the weaving or spinning princess. The Sun King noticed the serious disposition and close habits of his daughter, and tried in various ways to get her to be more lively. At last he thought to marry her. As marriages in the Starland are usually planned by the parents and not by the foolish lover boys and girls, he arranged the union without consulting his daughter. The young man on whom the Sun King thus bestowed his daughter's hand was Kingen, who kept a herd of cows on the banks of the celestial stream. He had always been a good neighbor, and living on the same side of the river, the father thought that he would get a nice son-in-law, and at the same time improve his daughter's habits and disposition. No sooner did the maiden become wife than her habits and character utterly changed for the worse, and the father had a very vexatious case of Tadashiku Suguru, too much of a good thing, on his hands. The wife became not only very merry and lively, but utterly forsook loom and needle. She gave up her nights and days to play and idleness, and no silly lover could have been more foolish than she. The Sun King became very much offended at all this, and thinking that the husband was the cause of it, he determined to separate the couple. So he ordered the husband to remove to the other side of the River of Stars, and told him that hereafter they should meet only once a year on the 7th night of the 7th month. To make a bridge over the flood of stars, the Sun King called myriads of magpies, which thereupon flew together, and making a bridge, supported him on their wings and backs as if it were a roadway of solid land. So, bidding his weeping wife farewell, the lover husband sorrowfully crossed to the river of heaven. No sooner had he set foot on the opposite side than the magpies flew away, filling all the heavens with their chatter. The weeping wife and lover husband stood for a long time, wistfully gazing at each other from afar. Then they separated, the one to lead his ox, the other to ply her shuttle during the long hours of the day with diligent toil. Thus they filled the hours, and the Sun King again rejoiced in his daughter's industry. But when night fell, and all the lamps of heaven were lighted, the lovers would come and stand by the banks of the starry river, and gaze longingly at each other, waiting for the 7th night of the 7th month. At last the time drew near, and only one fear possessed the loving wife. Every time she thought of it, her heart played pit-a-pat faster. What if it should rain? For the river of heaven is always full to the brim, and one extra drop of rain causes a flood, which sweeps away even the bird bridge. But not a drop fell. The 7th month, 7th night, came, and all the heavens were clear. The magpies flew joyfully in myriads, making one way for the tiny feet of the little lady. Trembling with joy, and with heart fluttering more than the bridge of wings, she crossed the river of heaven and was in the arms of her husband. This she did every year. The lover husband stayed on his side of the river, and the wife came to him on the Magpie Bridge, save on the sad occasion when it rained. So every year the people hope for clear weather, and the happy festival is celebrated alike by old and young. End of The Meeting of the Star Lovers by William Elliott Griffiths. Recorded by Colleen McMahon.
Plants of the Water Nymphs and Fays in Plant Lore, Legends, and Lyrics by Richard Faucard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Plants of the Water Nymphs and Fays. Certain of the fairy community frequented the vicinity of pools and the banks of streams and rivers. Ben Jonson tells of span-long elves that dance about a pool, and Stagnelius asks, "Say, knowest the elfin people gay? They dwell on the river's strand. They spin from the moonbeams their festive garb, with their small and lily hands." Of this family are the Rusalkis, river nymphs of southern Russia, who inhabit the alluvial islands studding the winding river, or dwell in detached coppices fringing the banks, or construct for themselves homes woven of flowering reeds and green willow boughs. The Swedes delight to tell of the Stromkarl, or boy of the stream, a mystic being who haunts brooks and rivulets, and sits on the silvery waves at moonlight, playing his harp to the elves and fays who dance on the flowery margin, in obedience to his summons. Come, queen of the revels, come, form into bands, the elves and the fairies that follow your train, tossing your tresses and wreathing your hands, let your dainty feet dance to my wave-wafted strain. The Greco-Latin Naiades, or water nymphs, were also of this family. They generally inhabited the country and resorted to the woods or meadows near the stream over which they presided. It was in some such locality on the Asiatic coast that the ill-fated Hylus was carried off by Isis and the river nymphs, whilst obtaining water from a fountain. The chiefs composed their wearied limbs to rest, but Hylus sought the springs by thirst oppressed. At last a fount he found with flowerets graced, on the green bank above his urn he placed. 'Twas at a time when old Ascantius made an entertainment in his watery bed, for all the nymphs and all the Naiades, inhabitants of neighboring plains and seas. These inferior deities were held in great veneration, and received from their votaries offerings of fruit and flowers. Animal sacrifices were also made to them with libations of wine, honey, oil, and milk, and they were crowned with sedges and flowers. A remnant of these customs was to be seen in the practice which formerly prevailed in this country of sprinkling rivers with flowers on Holy Thursday. Milton, in his Comus, tells us that in honor of Sabrina, the nymph of the Severn, the shepherds at their festivals carol her good deeds loud in rustic lays, and throw sweet garland wreaths into her stream of pansies, pinks, and gaudy daffodils. A belief in the existence of good spirits who watched and guarded wells, springs, and streams was common to the whole Aryan race. On the 13th of October, the Romans celebrated at the Porta Fontinalis a festival in honor of the nymphs who presided over fountains and wells. This was termed the Fontinalia, and during the ceremonies, wells and fountains were ornamented with garlands. To this day, the old heathen custom of dressing and adorning wells is extant, although saints and martyrs have long since taken the place of the Naiades and water nymphs as patrons. In England, well-dressing at Ascensiontide is still practiced, and some particulars of the ancient custom will be found in the chapter on floral ceremonies. The fountain marge is fairly spread, with every incense flower that blows, with flowery sedge and moss that grows, for fervid limbs a dewy bed. Fane. Pilgrimages are made to many holy wells and springs in the United Kingdom for the purpose of curing certain diseases by the virtues contained in their waters, or to dress these health-restoring fountains with garlands and posies of flowers. It is not surprising to find Ben Jonson saying that round such virtuous wells the fairies are fond of assembling, and dancing their rounds, lighted by the pale moonshine. By wells and rills in meadows green, we nightly dance our heyday guise, and to our fairy king and queen we chant our moonlight minstrelsies. Percy Reliques. In Cornwall, pilgrimages are made in May to certain wells situated close to old blasted oaks, where the frequenters suspend rags to the branches as a preservative against sorcery and appropriation to the fairies, who are thought to be fond of repairing at night to the vicinity of the wells. From St. Mungo's Well at Huntly, in Scotland, the people carry away bottles of water as a talisman against the enmity of the fairies, who are supposed to hold their revels at the elfin croft close by, and are prone to resent the intrusion of mortals. End of Plants of the Water Nymphs and Fays in Plant Lore, Legends, and Lyrics by Richard Faucard.
Ivan Tsarevich, the Firebird, and the Grey Wolf in Myths and Folk Tales of the Russians, Western Slavs, and Magyars by Jeremiah Curtin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, Please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Jean Pease. In a certain kingdom, in a certain land, lived Tsar Vislav Andranovich. He had 3 sons, Dmitri Tsarevich, Vasily Tsarevich, and Ivan Tsarevich. Tsar Vislav had a garden so rich that in no land was there better. In the garden grew many precious trees, with fruit and without fruits. Tsar Vislav had one favorite apple tree, and on that tree grew apples all golden. The firebird used to fly to the garden of Tsar Vislav. She had wings of gold and eyes like crystals of the east, and she used to fly to that garden every night, sit on the favorite apple tree, pluck from it golden apples, then fly away. The Tsar grieved greatly over that apple tree because the firebird plucked from it many apples. Therefore he called his 3 sons and said, "My dear children, whichever one of you can catch the firebird in my garden and take her alive, to him I will give during my life 1/2 of the kingdom, and at my death I will give it all." Then the sons cried out in one voice, "Gracious sovereign, our father, we will try with great pleasure to take the firebird alive." The first night, Dmitri Tsarevich went to watch in the garden and sat under the apple tree from which the firebird had been plucking the apples. He fell asleep and did not hear the firebird when she came, nor when she plucked many apples. Next morning, Tsar Vasilav called his son Dmitri Tsarevich and asked, "Well, my dear son, hast thou seen the firebird?" "No, gracious sovereign, my father, she came not last night." The next night Vasily Tsarevich went to the garden to watch the firebird. He sat under the same apple tree, and in a couple of hours fell asleep so soundly that he did not hear the firebird when she came, nor when she plucked apples. Next morning Tsar Vislav called him and asked, "Well, my son, hast thou seen the firebird?" "Gracious sovereign, my father, she came not last night." The third night Ivan Tsarevich went to watch in the garden and sat under the same apple tree. He sat an hour, a second, and a third. All at once the whole garden was lighted up as if by many fires. The firebird flew hither, perched on the apple tree, and began to pluck apples. Ivan stole up to her so warily that he caught her tail, but could not hold the bird. She tore off, flew away, and there remained in the hand of Ivan Tsarevich but one feather of the tail, which he held very firmly. Next morning, the moment Tsar Vislav woke from his sleep, Ivan Tsarevich went to him and gave him the feather of the firebird. The Tsar was greatly delighted that his youngest son had been able to get even one feather of the firebird. This feather was so wonderful and bright that when carried into a dark chamber it shone as if a great multitude of tapers were lighted in that place. Tsar Vislav put the feather in his cabinet as a thing to be guarded forever. From that time forth the firebird flew to the garden no more. Tsar Vislav again called his sons and said, "My dear children, I give you my blessing. Set out, find the firebird, and bring her to me alive, and what I promised at first he will surely receive who brings me the bird." Dmitri and Vasily Tsarevich began to cherish hatred against their youngest brother because he had pulled the feather from the tail of the firebird. They took their father's blessing and both went to find the firebird. Ivan Tsarevich too began to beg his father's blessing. The Tsar said to him, "My dear son, my darling child, thou art still young, unused to such a long and difficult journey. Why shouldst thou part from me? Thy brothers have gone. Now if thou goest too, and all 3 of you fail to return for a long time, I am old and walk under God, and if during your absence the Lord takes my life, who would rule in my place? There might be a rebellion, too, or disagreement among our people. There would be no one to stop it. Or if an enemy should invade our land, there would be no one to command our men. But no matter how the Tsar tried to detain Ivan Tsarevich, he could not avoid letting him go at his urgent prayer. Ivan Tsarevich took a blessing of his father, chose a horse, and rode away. He rode on, not knowing himself whither. Riding by the path, by the road, whether it was near or far, high or low, a tale is soon told, but a deed's not soon done. At last he came to the green meadows. In the open field a pillar stands, and on the pillar these words are written: "Whoever goes from the pillar straight forward will be hungry and cold. Whoever goes to the right will be healthy and well, but his horse will be dead. Whoever goes to the left hand will be killed himself, but his horse will be living and well." Ivan read the inscription and went to the right hand, holding in mind that though his horse might be killed, he would remain alive and might in time get another horse. He rode one day, a second, and a third. All at once an enormous grey wolf came out against him and said, "Oh, is that thou tender youth, Ivan Tsarevich? Thou hast read on the pillar that thy horse will be dead. Why hast thou come hither then?" The wolf said these words, tore Ivan Tsarevich's horse in two, and went to one side. Ivan grieved greatly for his horse. He cried bitterly and went forward on foot. He walked all day and was unspeakably tired. He was going to sit down and rest when all at once the grey wolf caught up with him and said, "I am sorry for thee, Ivan Tsarevich. Thou art tired from walking. I am sorry that I ate thy good steed. Well, sit on me, the old wolf, and tell me whither to bear thee, and why." Ivan Tsarevich told the grey wolf whither he had to go, and the grey wolf shot ahead with him swifter than a horse. After a time, just at nightfall, he brought Ivan Tsarevich to a stone wall, not very high, halted, and said, "Now, Ivan Tsarevich, come down from the grey wolf, climb over that stone wall. On the other side is a garden, and in the garden the firebird in a golden cage. Take the firebird, but touch not the cage. If thou takest the cage, thou'lt not escape. They will seize thee straightway." Ivan Tsarevich climbed over the wall into the garden, saw the firebird in the golden cage, and was greatly tempted by the cage. He took the bird out and was going back, but changed his mind and thought, "Why have I taken the bird without the cage? Where can I put her?" He returned, but had barely taken down the cage when there was a hammering and thundering throughout the whole garden, for there were wires attached to the cage. The watchman woke up at that moment, ran to the garden, caught Ivan Tsarevich with the firebird, and took him to the Tsar, who was called Dolmat. Tsar Dolmat was terribly enraged at Ivan and shouted at him in loud, angry tones, "Is it not a shame for thee, young man, to steal? But who art thou? Of what land? Of what father a son? And how do they call thee by name?" Ivan Tsarevich replied, "I am from Vislav's kingdom, the son of Tsar Vislav Andranovich, and they call me Ivan Tsarevich. The firebird used to fly to our garden each night and pluck golden apples from my father's favorite apple tree, and destroyed almost the whole tree. Therefore my father has sent me to find the firebird and bring it to him." "Oh, youthful young man, Ivan Tsarevich," said Tsar Dolmat, "is it fitting to do as thou hast done? Thou shouldest have come to me, and I would have given thee the firebird with honor. But now, will it be well for thee when I send to all lands to declare how dishonorably thou hast acted in my kingdom? Listen, however, Ivan Tsarevich. If thou wilt do me a service, if thou wilt go beyond the thrice 9th land to the 30th kingdom, and get for me from Tsar Afron the golden-maned steed, I will forgive thy offense and give thee the firebird with great honor. If not, I will publish in all kingdoms that thou art a dishonorable thief." Ivan Tsarevich went away from Tsar Dolmat in great grief, promising to obtain for him the golden maned steed. He came to the Grey Wolf and told him all that Tsar Dolmat had said. "Oh, is that thou, youthful young man, Ivan Tsarevich? Why didst thou disobey my words and take the golden cage?" "I have offended in thy sight," said Ivan to the Grey Wolf. "Well, let that go. Sit on me, and I will take thee wherever thou wilt." Ivan Tsarevich sat on the back of the Grey Wolf. The wolf was as swift as an arrow and ran, whether it was long or short, till he came at last to the kingdom of Tsar Afron in the night time. Coming to the white-walled stables, the Grey Wolf said, "Go, Ivan Tsarevich, into these white-walled stables. The grooms on guard are sleeping soundly, and take the golden maned steed. On the wall hangs a golden bridle, but take not the bridle, or it will go ill with thee." Ivan Tsarevich entered the white-walled stables, took the steed, and was coming back, but he saw on the walls the golden bridle, and was so tempted that he took it from the nail. That moment there went a thunder and noise throughout the stable, because strings were tied to the bridle. The grooms on guard woke up that moment, rushed in, seized Ivan Tsarevich, and took him to Tsar Afron. Tsar Afron began to question him. "O youthful man, tell me from what land thou art, of what father a son, how do they call thee by name?" To this Ivan Tsarevich replied, "I am from Wislav's kingdom, the son of Tsar Wislav, and they call me Ivan Tsarevich." "O youthful young man, Ivan Tsarevich," said Tsar Afron, "was that which thou hast done the deed of an honorable knight? I would have given thee the golden maned steed with honor, but now will it be well for thee when I send to all lands a declaration of how dishonorably thou hast acted in my kingdom? Hear me, however, Ivan Tsarevich. If thou wilt do me a service, and go beyond the thrice 9th land to the 30th kingdom, and bring to me Princess Yelena the Beautiful, with whom I am in love, heart and soul, for a long time, but whom I cannot obtain, I will pardon thy offense, and give thee the golden maned steed with honor. And if thou wilt not do me this service, I will declare in all lands that thou art a dishonorable thief." Ivan Tsarevich promised Tsar Afron to bring Yelena the Beautiful, left the palace, and fell to crying bitterly. He came to the Grey Wolf and told him all that happened. "Oh, Ivan Tsarevich, thou youthful young man," said the Grey Wolf, "why didst thou disobey me and take the golden bridle?" "I have offended thee in thy sight," said Ivan Tsarevich. "Well, let that go," replied the wolf. "Sit on me. I will take thee wherever need be." Ivan Tsarevich sat on the back of the Grey Wolf, who ran as swiftly as an arrow flies, and he ran in such fashion as to be told in a tale no long time, and at last he came to the kingdom of Yelena the Beautiful. Coming to the golden fence which surrounded her wonderful garden, the wolf said, "Now, Ivan Tsarevich, come down from me and go back by the same road along which we came, and wait in the field under the green oak." Ivan Tsarevich went where he was commanded, but the Grey Wolf sat near the golden fence and waited till Yelena the Beautiful should walk in the garden. Toward evening, when the sun was sinking low in the west, therefore it was not very warm in the air, Princess Yelena went to walk in the garden with her maidens and court ladies. When she entered the garden and approached the palace where the Grey Wolf was sitting behind the fence, he jumped out suddenly, caught the princess, sprang back again, and bore her away with all his power and might. He came to the green oak in the open field where Ivan Tsarevich was waiting and said, "Ivan Tsarevich, sit on me quickly." Ivan sat on him, and the grey wolf bore them both along swiftly to the kingdom of Tsarevich. The nurses and maidens and all the court ladies who had been walking in the garden with Princess Yelena the Beautiful ran straight away to the palace and sent pursuers to overtake the grey wolf. But no matter how they ran, they could not overtake him, and turned back. Ivan Tsarevich, while sitting on the grey wolf with Princess Yelena the Beautiful, came to love her with his heart, and she Ivan Tsarevich. And when the grey wolf arrived at the kingdom of Tsarevich, and Ivan Tsarevich had to take Yelena the Beautiful to the palace and give her to Tsarevich, he grew very sad, and began to weep tearfully. "What art thou weeping for, Ivan Tsarevich?" asked the grey wolf. "My friend, why should I, good youth, not weep? I have formed a heartfelt love for Yelena the Beautiful, and now I must give her to Tsarevich for the golden-maned steed. And if I yield her not, then Tsarevich will dishonor me in all lands." "I have served thee much, Ivan Tsarevich," said the grey wolf, "and I will do yet this service. Listen to me. I will turn myself into a princess, Yelena the Beautiful. Do thou give me to Tsarevich, and take from him the golden-maned steed. He will think me the real princess, and when thou art sitting on the steed and riding far away, I will beg of Tsarevich permission to walk in the open field. When he lets me go with the maidens and nurses and all the court ladies, and I am with them in the open field, remember me, and I will come to thee." The grey wolf spoke these words, struck the damp earth, and became a princess, Yelena the Beautiful, so that it was not possible in any way to know that the wolf was not the princess. Ivan Tsarevich told Yelena the Beautiful to wait outside the town, and took the grey wolf to the palace of Tsarevich. When Ivan Tsarevich came with the pretended Yelena the Beautiful, Tsarevich was greatly delighted in his heart that he had received a treasure which he had long desired. He took the false maiden and gave Ivan Tsarevich the golden-maned steed. Ivan Tsarevich mounted the steed and rode out of the town, seated Yelena the Beautiful with him, and rode on, holding his way toward the kingdom of Tsardolmont. The grey wolf lived with Tsarevich a day, a second, and a third, instead of Yelena the Beautiful. On the fourth day he went to Tsarevich, begging to go out in the open field to walk, to drive away cruel grief and sorrow. Then Tsarevich said, "Oh, my beautiful Princess Yelena, I will do everything for thee. I will let thee go to the open field to walk." And straightway he commanded the nurses, the maidens, and all the court ladies to go to the open field and walk with the beautiful princess. Ivan Tsarevich was riding along his road and path with Yelena the Beautiful, talking with her, and he had forgotten about the grey wolf, but afterward remembered, "Oh, where is my grey wolf?" All at once, from wherever he came, the wolf stood before Ivan and said, "Ivan Tsarevich, sit on me, the grey wolf, and let the beautiful princess ride on the golden-maned steed." Ivan Tsarevich sat on the grey wolf, and they went toward the kingdom of Tsardolmont. Whether they journeyed long or short, when they had come to the kingdom, they stopped about 3 versts from the capital town, and Ivan Tsarevich began to implore, "Listen to me, grey wolf, my dear friend. Thou hast shown me many a service. Show me the last one now, and the last one is this. Couldst thou not turn to a golden-maned steed instead of this one? For I do not like to part with this horse." Suddenly the grey wolf struck the damp earth and became a golden-maned steed. Ivan Tsarevich, leaving Princess Yelena in the green meadow, sat on the grey wolf and went to the palace of Tsardolmont. The moment he came, Tsardolmont saw that Ivan Tsarevich was riding on the golden-maned steed, and he rejoiced greatly. Straightway he went out of the palace and met the Tsarevich in the broad court, kissed him, took him by the right hand, and led him into the white stone chambers. Tsar Dolmat, on the occasion of such joy, gave orders for a feast, and they sat at the oaken table at the spread cloth. They ate, they drank, they amused themselves and rejoiced exactly 2 days. And on the 3rd day Tsar Dolmat gave Ivan Tsarevich the firebird, together with the golden cage. Ivan took the firebird, went outside the town, sat on the golden-maned steed together with Yelena the Beautiful, and went toward his own native place, toward the kingdom of Tsar Vislav. Tsar Dolmat the next day thought to take a ride through the open field on his golden-maned steed. He ordered them to saddle him. He sat on the horse and rode to the open field. The moment he urged the horse threw Tsar Dolmat off his back, became the gray wolf as before, ran off, and came up with Ivan Tsarevich. "Ivan Tsarevich," said he, "sit on me, the gray wolf, and let Yelena the Beautiful ride on the golden-maned steed." Ivan sat on the gray wolf, and they went their way. When the gray wolf had brought Ivan to the place where he had torn his horse, he stopped and said, "I have served thee sufficiently with faith and truth. On this spot I tore thy horse in two. To this spot I have brought thee. Come down from me, the gray wolf. Thou hast a golden-maned steed. Sit on him, and go wherever thou hast need. I am no longer thy servant." The gray wolf said these words and ran to one side. Ivan wept bitterly for the gray wolf and went on with the beautiful princess. Whether he rode long or short with the beautiful princess, when he was within 20 versts of his own kingdom, he stopped, dismounted, and he and the beautiful princess rested from the heat of the sun under a tree. He tied the golden-maned steed to the same tree and put the cage of the firebird by his side. Lying on the soft grass, they talked pleasantly and fell soundly asleep. At that time, the brothers of Ivan Tsarevich, Dmitri and Vasily Tsarevich, after traveling through many lands without finding the firebird, were on their way home with empty hands, and came unexpectedly upon their brother with the beautiful princess. Seeing the golden-maned steed and the firebird in the cage, they were greatly tempted and thought of killing their brother Ivan. Dmitri took his own sword out of the scabbard, stabbed Ivan Tsarevich, and cut him to pieces. Then he roused the beautiful princess and asked, "Beautiful maiden, of what land art thou? Of what father a daughter? And how do they call thee by name?" The beautiful princess, seeing Ivan Tsarevich dead, was terribly frightened. She began to shed bitter tears, and in her tears she said, "I am Princess Yelena the Beautiful. Ivan Tsarevich, whom ye have given to a cruel death, got me. If ye were good knights, ye would have gone with him into the open field and conquered him there. But ye killed him when asleep, and what fame will ye receive for yourselves? A sleeping man is the same as a dead one." Then Dmitri Tsarevich put his sword to the heart of Yelena the Beautiful and said, "Hear me, Yelena the Beautiful. Thou art now in our hands. We will take thee to our father, Tsar Vislav. Thou wilt tell him that we got thee, and the firebird, and the golden-maned steed. If not, we will give thee to death this minute." The princess, afraid of death, promised them, and swore by everything sacred that she would speak as commanded. Then they began to cast lots who should have Yelena the Beautiful, and who the golden-maned steed. And the lot fell that the princess should go to Vasily, and the golden-maned steed to Dmitri. Then Vasily Tsarevich took the princess and placed her on his horse. Dmitri sat on the golden-maned steed and took the firebird to give to their father, Tsar Vislav, and they went their way. Ivan Tsarevich lay dead on that spot exactly 30 days. Then the gray wolf ran up, knew Ivan by his odor, wanted to aid him, to bring him to life, but knew not how. Just then the grey wolf saw a raven with 2 young ones who were flying above the body and wanted to eat the flesh of Ivan Tsarevich. The wolf hid behind a bush, and when the young ravens had come down and were ready to eat the body, he sprang out, caught one, and was going to tear it in 2. Then the raven came down, sat a little way from the grey wolf, and said, "O grey wolf, touch not my young child. It has done nothing to thee." "Listen to me, raven," said the grey wolf. "I will not touch thy child. I will let it go unharmed, and well if thou wilt do me a service. Fly beyond the thrice 9th land to the 30th kingdom, and bring me the water of death and the water of life. I will do that, but touch not my son." Having said these words, the raven flew away and soon disappeared from sight. On the 3rd day the raven returned, bringing 2 vials, in one the water of life, in the other the water of death, and gave them both to the grey wolf. The wolf took the vials, tore the young raven in 2, sprinkled it with the water of death. The little raven grew together. He sprinkled it with the water of life, and the raven sprung up and flew away. The grey wolf sprinkled Ivan Tsarevich with the water of death. The body grew together, and he sprinkled it with the water of life. Ivan Tsarevich stood up and exclaimed, "Oh, how long I have slept! Thou wouldst have slept forever, had it not been for me. Thy brothers cut thee to pieces and carried off Princess Yelena with the golden-maned steed and the firebird. Now hurry with all speed to thy own country. Vasily Tsarevich will marry thy bride today. To reach home quickly, sit on me, I will bear thee." Ivan sat on the grey wolf. The wolf ran with him to the kingdom of Tsarvislav, and whether it was long or short, he ran to the edge of town. Ivan sprang from the grey wolf, walked into the town, and found that his brother Vasily had married Yelena the Beautiful, had returned with her from the ceremony, and was sitting with her at the feast. Ivan Tsarevich entered the palace, and when Yelena the Beautiful saw him, she sprang up from the table, kissed him, and cried out, "This is my dear bridegroom, Ivan Tsarevich, and not that scoundrel at the table." Then Tsarvislav rose from his place and asked the meaning of these words. Yelena the Beautiful told the whole truth, told how Ivan Tsarevich had won her, the golden-maned steed and the firebird, how his elder brother had killed him while asleep, and how they had terrified her into saying that they had won everything. Tsarvislav was terribly enraged at Dmitri and Vasily and cast them into prison, but Ivan Tsarevich married Yelena the Beautiful and lived with her in harmony and love, so that one of them could not exist a single minute without the other. End of Ivan Tsarevich, the Firebird, and the Grey Wolf by Jeremiah Curtin.
The Barn Elves, in Folklore and Legends, English, by W. Gibbings. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Connor E. 53. The Barn Elves. An honest Hampshire farmer was sore distressed by the nightly unsettling of his barn. However straightly, overnight he laid his sheaves on the threshing floor for the application of the morning's flail. When morning came, all was topsy-turvy, higgledy-piggledy, though the door remained locked and there was no sign of whatever irregular entry. Resolved to find out who played him these mischievous pranks, Hodge couched himself one night deeply among the sheaves and watched for the enemy. At length, midnight arrived. The barn was illuminated as if by moonbeams of wonderful brightness, and through the keyhole came thousands of elves, the most diminutive that could be imagined. They immediately began their gambols among the straw, which was soon in the most admired disorder. Hodge wondered, but interfered not. But at last the supernatural thieves began to busy themselves in a way still less to his taste, for each elf set about conveying the crop away, a straw at a time, with astonishing activity and perseverance. The keyhole was still their port of egress and regress, and it resembled the aperture of a beehive on a sunny day in June. The farmer was rather annoyed at seeing his grain vanish in this fashion, when one of the fairies, while hard at work, said to another, in the tiniest voice that ever was heard, "Oh, I'm wet. You wet?" Hodge could contain himself no longer. He leapt out, crying, "The deuce sweat ye! Let me get among ye!" The fairies all flew away, so frightened that they never disturbed the barn any more. End of The Barn Elves by W. Gibbings. Beth Gellert in Celtic Fairy Tales by Joseph Jacobs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Connor E. 53. Beth Gellert. Prince Llewellyn had a favourite greyhound named Gellert that had been given to him by his father-in-law, King John. He was as gentle as a lamb at home, but a lion in the chase. One day, Llewellyn went to the chase and blew his horn in front of his castle. All his other dogs came to the call, but Gellert never answered it. So he blew a louder blast on his horn and called Gellert by name, but still the greyhound did not come. At last, Prince Llewellyn could wait no longer, and went off to hunt without Gellert. He had little sport that day because Gellert was not there, the swiftest and boldest of his hounds. He turned back in a rage to his castle, and as he came to the gate, who should he see but Gellert come bounding out to meet him. But when the hound came near him, the prince was startled to see that his lips and fangs were dripping with blood. Llewellyn started back, and the greyhound crouched down at his feet, as if surprised or afraid at the way his master greeted him. Now Prince Llewellyn had a little son, a year old, with whom Gellert used to play, and a terrible thought crossed the prince's mind that made him rush towards the child's nursery. And the nearer he came, the more blood and disorder he found about the rooms. He rushed into it and found the child's cradle overturned and daubed with blood. Prince Llewellyn grew more and more terrified and sought for his little son everywhere. He could find him nowhere, but only signs of some terrible conflict in which much blood had been shed. At last he felt sure the dog had destroyed his child, and shouting to Gellert, "Monster, thou hast devoured my child!" he drew out his sword and plunged it in the greyhound's side, who fell with a deep yell and still gazing in his master's eyes. As Gellert raised his dying yell, a little child's cry answered it from beneath the cradle, and there Llewellyn found his child, unharmed and just awakened from sleep. But just beside him lay the body of a great gaunt wolf, all torn to pieces and covered in blood. Too late, Llewellyn learned what had happened while he was away. Gellert had stayed behind to guard the child and had fought and slain the wolf that had tried to destroy Llewellyn's heir. In vain was all Llewellyn's grief. He could not bring his faithful dog to life again. So he buried him outside the castle walls within sight of the great mountain of Snowdon, where every passer-by might see his grave, and raised over it a great cairn of stones, and to this day the place is called Beth Gellert, or the Grave of Gellert. End of Beth Gellert by Joseph Jacobs.
Dinewan the Emu and Goomblegubbon the Bustard in Australian Legendary Tales, Folklore of the Noongahburrahs as Told to the Pickaninnies by K. Langlow Parker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Knight. Dinewan the Emu and Goomblegubbon the Bustard. Dinewan the Emu, being the largest bird, was acknowledged as king by the other birds. The Goomblegubbons, the Bustards, were jealous of the Dinewans. Particularly was Goomblegubbon, the mother, jealous of the Dinewan mother. She would watch with envy the high flight of the Dinewans and their swift running, and she always fancied that the Dinewan mother flaunted her superiority in her face, for whenever Dinewan alighted near Goomblegubbon after a long, high flight, she would flap her big wings and begin booing in her pride, not the loud booing of the male bird, but a little triumphant, satisfied booing noise of her own, which never failed to irritate Goomblegubbon when she heard it. Goomblegubbon used to wonder how she could put an end to Dinewan's supremacy. She decided that she would only be able to do so by injuring her wings and checking her power of flight. But the question that troubled her was how to effect this end. She knew she would gain nothing by having a quarrel with Dinewan and fighting her, for no Goomblegubbon would stand any chance against a Dinewan. There was evidently nothing to be gained by an open fight. She would have to effect her end by cunning. One day, when Goomblegubbon saw in the distance Dinewan coming towards her, she squatted down and doubled in her wings in such a way as to look as if she had none. After Dinewan had been talking to her for some time, Goomblegubbon said, "Why do you not imitate me and do without wings? Every bird flies. The Dinewans, to be the king of birds, should do without wings. When all the birds see that I can do without wings, they will think I am the cleverest bird, and they will make a Goomblegubbon king." "But you have wings," said Dinewan. "No, I have no wings." And indeed she looked as if her words were true. So well were her wings hidden as she squatted in the grass. Dinewan went away after a while, and thought much of what she had heard. She talked it over with her mate, who was as disturbed as she was. They made up their minds that it would never do to let the Goomblegubbons reign in their stead, even if they had to lose their wings to save their kingship. At length they decided on the sacrifice of their wings. The Dinewan mother showed the example by persuading her mate to cut off hers with a combo or stone tomahawk, and then she did the same to his. As soon as the operations were over, the Dinewan mother lost no time in letting Goomblegubbon know what they had done. She ran swiftly down to the plain on which she had left Goomblegubbon, and, finding her still squatting there, she said, "See, I have followed your example. I have now no wings. They are cut off." "Ha ha ha!" laughed Goomblegubbon, jumping up and dancing round with joy at the success of her plot. As she danced round, she spread out her wings, flapped them, and said, "I have taken you in, old stumpy wings. I have my wings yet. You are fine birds, you Dinewans, to be chosen kings when you are so easily taken in. Ha ha!" And laughing derisively, Goomblegubbon flapped her wings right in front of Dinewan, who rushed towards her to chastise her treachery. But Goomblegubbon flew away, and alas, the now wingless Dinewan could not follow her. Brooding over her wrongs, Dinewan walked away, vowing she would be revenged. But how? That was the question which she and her mate failed to answer for some time. At length the Dinewan mother thought of a plan and prepared at once to execute it. She hid all her young Dinewans but two under a big salt bush. Then she walked off to Goomblegubbon's plain with the two young ones following her. As she walked off the Morilla Ridge, where her home was, onto the plain, she saw Goomblegubbon out feeding with her 12 young ones. After exchanging a few remarks in a friendly manner with Goomblegubbon, she said to her, "Why do you not imitate me and only have 2 children? 12 are too many to feed. If you keep so many, they will never grow big birds like the Dinewans. The food that would make big birds of 2 would only starve 12. Goomblegubbon said nothing, but she thought it might be so. It was impossible to deny that the young Dinewans were much bigger than the young Goomblegubbons, and discontentedly Goomblegubbon walked away, wondering whether the smallness of her young ones was owing to the number of them being so much greater than that of the Dinewans. It would be grand, she thought, to grow as big as the Dinewans, but she remembered the trick she had played on Dinewan, and she thought that perhaps she was being fooled in her turn. She looked back to where the Dinewans fed, and as she saw how much bigger the two young ones were than any of hers, once more mad envy of Dinewan possessed her. She determined she would not be outdone. Rather would she kill all her young ones but two. She said, "The Dinewan shall not be the king birds of the plains. The Goomblegubbon shall replace them. They shall grow as big as the Dinewans, and shall keep their wings and fly, which now the Dinewans cannot do." And straightway Goomblegubbon killed all her young ones but two. Then back she came to where the Dinewans were still feeding. When Dinewan saw her coming and noticed she had only two young ones with her, she called out, "Where are all your young ones?" Goomblegubbon answered, "I have killed them, and have only two left. Those will have plenty to eat now, and will soon grow as big as your young ones." "You cruel mother, to kill your children! You greedy mother! Why, I have 12 children. I find food for them all. I would not kill one for anything, not even if by doing so I could get back my wings. There is plenty for all. Look at the emu bush, how it covers itself with berries to feed my big family. See how the grasshoppers come hopping round, so that we can catch them and fatten on them." "But you have only 2 children." "I have 12. I will go and bring them to show you." Dinewan ran off to her salt bush, where she had hidden her 10 young ones. Soon she was to be seen coming back, running with her neck stretched forward, her head thrown back with pride, and the feathers of her bubatella swinging as she ran, booming out the while her queer throat noise, the Dinewan's song of joy, the pretty, soft-looking little ones with their zebra-striped skins, running beside her, whistling their baby Dinewan note. When Dinewan reached the place where Goomblegubbon was, she stopped her booing and said in a solemn tone, "Now you see my words are true. I have 12 young ones, as I said. You can gaze at my loved ones and think of your poor murdered children. And while you do so, I will tell you the fate of your descendants forever. By trickery and deceit you lost the Dinewans their wings, and now forevermore, as long as a Dinewan has no wings, so long shall a Goomblegubbon lay only 2 eggs and have only 2 young ones. We are quits now. You have your wings, and I my children." And ever since that time a Dinewan or emu has had no wings, and a Goomblegubbon or Bustard of the plains has laid only 2 eggs in a season. End of Dinewan the Emu and Goomblegubbon the Bustard by K. Langlow Parker.
Hyacinthus by Jean Lang. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The sad death of Hyacinthus. When the cruel breath of Zephyr slew him, Zephyr penitent, who now, ere Phoebus mounts the firmament, fondles the flower amid the sobbing rain. Keats. Whom the gods love die young. Truly it would seem so, as we read the old tales of men and of women beloved of the gods, to those men who were deemed worthy of being companions of the gods. Seemingly no good fortune came, yet, after all, if even in a brief span of life they had tasted God-given happiness, was their fate one to be pitied? Rather let us keep our tears for those who, in a colorless grey world, have seen the dull days go past laden with trifling duties, unnecessary cares, and ever-narrowing ideals, and have reached old age and the grave, no narrower than their lives, without ever having known a fullness of happiness such as the Olympians knew, or ever having dared to reach upwards and to hold fellowship with the immortals. Hyacinthus was a Spartan youth, son of Clio, one of the Muses, and of the mortal with whom she had mated, and from mother or father or from the gods themselves he had received the gift of beauty. It chanced one day that as Apollo drove his chariot on its all-conquering round, he saw the boy. Hyacinthus was as fair to look upon as the fairest of women, Yet he was not only full of grace, but was muscular and strong as a straight young pine on Mount Olympus that fears not the blind rage of the north wind, nor the angry tempest of the south. When Apollo had spoken with him, he found that the face of Hyacinthus did not belly the heart within him, and gladly the god felt that at last he had found the perfect companion, the ever courageous and a joyous young mate, whose mood was always ready to meet his own. Did Apollo desire to hunt with merry South's Hyacinthus call the hounds? Did the great god deign to fish, Hyacinthus was ready to fetch the nets and to throw himself whole-souled into the great affair of chasing and of landing the silvery fishes. When Apollo wished to climb the mountains, to heights so lonely that not even the moving of an eagle's wing broke the everlasting stillness, Hyacinthus, his strong limbs too perfect for the chisel of any sculptor worthily to reproduce, was ready and eager for the climb. And when, on the mountain top, Apollo gazed in silence over illimitable space and watched the silver car of his sister Diana rising slowly into the deep blue of the sky, silvering land and water as he passed, it was never Hyacinthus who was the first to speak. With words to break the spell of nature's perfect beauty, shared in perfect companionship, there were times too when Apollo would play his lyre, and when naught but the music of his own making could fulfill his longing. And when those times came, Hyacinthus would lie at the feet of his friend, of the friend who was a god, and would listen with eyes of rapturous joy to the music that his master made. A perfect friend was this friend of the sun god. Nor was it Apollo alone who desired the friendship of Hyacinthus. Zephyrus, god of the south wind, had known him before Apollo crossed his path and had eagerly desired him for a friend. But who could stand against Apollo? Sulkily Zephyrus marked their ever-ripening friendship, and in his heart jealousy grew into hatred, and hatred whispered to him of revenge. Hyacinthus excelled at all sports, and when he played quoits, it was sheer joy for Apollo, who loved all things beautiful, to watch him as he stood to throw the disc, his stout muscles making him look like Hermes, ready to spurn the cumbering earth from off his feet. Further even than the god, his friend, could Hyacinthus throw, and always his merry laugh, when he succeeded, made the god feel that nor man nor god could ever grow old. And so there came that day, foreordained by the fates, when Apollo and Hyacinthus played a match together. Hyacinthus made a valiant throw, and Apollo took his place and cast the discus high and far. Hyacinthus ran forward, eager to measure the distance, shouting with excitement over a throw that had indeed been worthy of a god. Thus did Zephyrus gain his opportunity. Swiftly through the tree tops ran the murmuring south wind, and smote the discus of Apollo with a cruel hand. Against the forehead of Hyacinthus it dashed, smiting the locks that lay upon it, crashing through skin and flesh and bone, felling him to the earth. Apollo ran towards him and raised him in his arms, but the head of Hyacinthus fell over on the god's shoulder, like the head of a lily whose stem is broken. The red blood gushed to the ground, an unquenchable stream, and a darkness fell on the eyes of Hyacinthus, and, with the flow of his life's blood, his gallant young soul passed away. "Would that I could die for thee, Hyacinthus," cried the god, his god's heart near breaking. "I have robbed thee of thy youth. Thine is the suffering, mine the crime. I shall sing thee ever, O perfect friend, and evermore shalt thou live as a flower that will speak to the hearts of men of spring, of everlasting youth, of life that lives forever." As he spoke, there sprang from the blood drops at his feet a cluster of flowers, blue as the sky in spring, yet hanging their heads as if in sorrow. And still, when the winter is ended, and the song of birds tell us of the promise of spring, if we go to the woods, we find traces of the vow of the sun god. The trees are budding in buds of rosy hue. The willow branches are decked with silvery catkins powdered with gold. The larches, like slender dryads, wear a feathery garb of tender green, and under the trees of the woods the primroses look up like fallen stars. Along the woodland path we go, treading on fragrant pine needles and on the beech leaves of last year that have not yet lost their radiant ember. And at a turn of the way, the sun god suddenly shines through the great dark branches of the giant of the forest, and before us lies a patch of exquisite blue, as though a god had robbed the sky and torn from it a precious fragment that seems alive and moving between the sun and the shadow. And as we look, the sun caresses it, and the south wind gently moves the little bell-shaped flowers of the wild hyacinth as it softly sweeps across them. So does the hyacinthus live on, so do Apollo and Zephyrus still love and mourn their friend. Footnote. Legend says that on the petals of the hyacinth, Apollo transcribed the letters I, alas. End of Hyacinthus by Jean Lang, read by James.
How the Sun Goddess was enticed out of her cave in Japanese Fairy World by William Elliott Griffith. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by TallyTiger. How the Sun Goddess was enticed out of her cave. When the far shining goddess, on account of the evil pranks of her brother Susanoo, the ruler of the moon, hid herself in a cave, there was no more light, and heaven and earth were plunged into darkness. A council of all the gods was held in the dry bed of one of the rivers, which we call the Milky Way, in the fields of heaven. The question of how to appease the anger of the goddess was discussed. A long-headed and very wise god was ordered to think out a plan to entice her forth from the cave. After due deliberation, it was resolved that a looking-glass should be made to tempt her to gaze at herself, and that tricks should be played to arouse her curiosity to come out and see what was going on. So setting to work with a will, the gods forced and polished a mirror, wove cloth for beautiful garments, built a pavilion, carved a necklace of jewels, made wands, and tried an augury, all being ready. The fat and rosy-cheeked goddess of mirth, with face full of dimples and eyes full of fun, named Uzume, was selected to lead the dance. She had a flute made from a bamboo cane, by piercing holes between the joints, while every god in the great orchestra had a pair of hardwood clappers, which he struck together. She bound up her long flowing sleeves with a creeper vine, and made for herself a batten of twigs of bamboo grass, by which she could direct the motions of the musicians. This she held in one hand, while in the other was a spear, wound round with grass, on which small bells tinkled. Great bonfires were lighted in front of the cave, so that the audience of gods could see the dance. A large circular box, which resounded like a drum when trod on, was set up for Uzumi to dance upon. The row of cocks now began to crow in concert. All being ready, the strong-handed god, who was to pull the sun goddess out of the cave, as soon as overcome by her curiosity, she should peep forth, hid himself beside the stone door of the cave. Uzume mounted the box and began to dance. As the drum box resounded, the spirit of folly seized her, and she began to chant a song. Becoming still more foolish, Uzume waved her wand wildly, loosening her dress, and danced till she not had a stitch of clothing left on her. The gods were so amused at her foolishness that they all laughed until the heavens shook with claps of thunder. The sun goddess within the cave heard all these strange noises, the crowing of the cocks, the hammering on the anvil, the chopping of the wood, the music of the koto, the clappering of the hardwood, the tinkling of the bells, the shouting of Uzume, and the boisterous laughs of the gods. Wondering what it all meant, she peeped out. As she did, the doubly beautiful goddess held up the mirror. The far shining one, seeing her own face in it, was greatly astonished. Curiosity got the better of fear. She looked far out. Instantly, the strong-handed god pulled the rocky door open, and seizing her hand, dragging her forward. Then all the heavens and earth were lightened, the trees and grass became green again, and the goddess of color resumed her work of tinting the flowers. The gloom fled from all eyes, and human beings again became white-faced. Thus the calamity which had befallen heaven and earth by the sun goddess hiding in the cave became a means of much benefit to mortals, for by their necessity the gods were compelled to invent the arts of metalworking, weaving, carpentry, jewelry, and many other useful appliances for the human race. They also, on this occasion, first made use of music, dancing, the Dai Kagura, the comedy which makes the gods laugh, and many of the games which the children play at the present time. End of How the Sun Goddess Was Enticed Out of Her Cave by William Elliot Griffith. Recorded by TallyTiger.
Olaf's Farm in Viking Tales by Jenny Hall. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Hope for Swan. Olaf's Farm. At another time Harald asked, "What is your country, Olaf? Have you always been a thrall?" The thrall's eyes flashed. "When you are a man," he said, "and go a Viking to Denmark, ask men whether they ever heard of Olaf the Crafty. There, far off, is my country, across the water. My father was Gudbrand the Big. 200 warriors feasted in his hall and followed him to battle. 10 sons sat at a meat with him, and I was the youngest. One day he said, 'You are all grown to be men. There is not elbow room here for so many chiefs. The eldest of you shall have my farm when I die, the rest of you off a Viking. You are all grown to be men. There is not elbow room here for so many chiefs. The eldest of you shall have my farm when I die, the rest of you off a Viking.' He had 3 ships. These he gave to 3 of my brothers, but I stayed that spring and built me a boat. I made here for only 20 oars, because I thought few men would follow me, for I was young, 15 years old. I made her in the likeness of a dragon. At the prow I carved the head, with open mouth and forked tongue thrust out. I painted the eyes red for anger. 'There, stand so,' I said, 'and glare and hiss at my foes.' In the stern I curved the tail, almost as high as the head. There I put the pilot's seat, and a strong tiller for the rudder. On the breast and sides I carved the dragon's scales. Then I painted it all black, and on the tip of every scale I put gold. I called her Wave Runner. There she sat on the rollers, as fair a ship as I ever saw. The night that it was finished I went to my father's feast. After the meats were eaten and the mead horns came round, I stood up from my bench and raised my drinking horn high and spoke with a great voice. 'This is my vow. I will sail to Norway, and I will harry the coast and fill my boat with riches. Then I will get me a farm and will winter in that land. Now who will follow me?' 'He is but a boy,' the man said. 'He has opened his mouth wider than he can do.' but others jumped to their feet with their mead horns in their hands. 30 men, one after another, raised their horns and said, "I will follow this lad, and I will not turn back so long as he and I live." On the next morning we got into my dragon and started. I sat high in the pilot's seat. As our boat flashed down the rollers into the water, I made this song and sang it. The dragons run, where will she steer, where swords will sing, where spears will bite, where I shall laugh. So we harried the coasts of Norway. We ate at many men's table uninvited. Many men we found overburdened with gold. Then I said, "My dragon's belly is never full," and on board went the gold. Oh, it is better to live on the sea, and let other men raise your crops and cook your meals. A house smells of smoke, a ship smells of frolic. From a house you see a sooty roof, from a ship you see Valhalla. Up and down the water we went, to get much wealth and much frolic. After a while my men said, "What of the farm, Olaf?" "Not yet," I answered. "Viking is better for summer. When the ice comes, and our dragon cannot play, then we will get our farm and sit down." At last the winter came, and I said to my men, "Now for the farm. I have my eye on one up the coast away in King Halfdan's country." So we set off for it. We landed late at night and pulled our boat up on shore and walked quietly to the house. It was rather a wealthy farm, for there were stables and a storehouse and a smithy at the sides of the house. There was but one door to the house. We went to it, and I struck it with my spear. "Hello, ho, hello," I shouted, and my men made a great din. At last someone from inside said, "Who calls?" "I call," I answered. "Open, or you will think it Thor who calls." And I struck my shield against the door, so that it made a great clanging. The door opened only a little, but I pushed it wide and leaped into the room. It was so dark that I could see nothing but a few sparks on the hearth. I stood with my back to the wall, for I wanted no sword reaching out of the dark for me. "Now start up the fire," I said. "Come, come," I called when no one obeyed. "A fire! This is cold welcome for your guests." My men laughed. "Yes, a stingy host. He acts as though he had not expected us." But now the farmer was blowing on the coals and putting on fresh wood. Soon it blazed up, and we could see about us. We were in a little feast hall, with its fire down the middle of it. There were benches for 20 men along each side. The farmer crouched by the fire, afraid to move. On a bench in a far corner were a dozen people huddled together. "Ho, thralls," I called to them. "Bring in the table, we are hungry." Off they ran through a door at the back of the hall. My men came in and lay down by the fire and warmed themselves, but I set 2 of them as guards at the door. "Well, friend farmer," laughed one, "why such a long face? Do you not think we shall be merry company?" "We came only to cheer you," said another. "What man wants to spend the winter with no guests?" "Ah," another then cried out, sitting up, "here comes something that will be a welcome guest to my stomach." The thralls were bringing in a great pot of meat. They set up a crane over the fire and hung the pot upon it, and we sat and watched it boil while we joked. At last the supper began. The farmer sat gloomily on the bench and would not eat, and you cannot wonder, for he saw us putting potfuls of his good beef and basket loads of bread into our big mouths. When the tables were taken out and the mead horns came round, I stood up and raised my horn and said to the farmer, "You would not eat with us, you cannot say no to half of my ale. I drink this to your health." Then I drank half of the hornful and sent the rest across the fire to the farmer. He took it and smiled, saying, "Since it is to my health, I will drink it. I thought that all this night's work would be my death." "Oh, do not fear that," I laughed, "for a dead man sets no tables." So we drank, and all grew merrier. At last I stood up and said, "I like this little taste of your hospitality, friend farmer. I have decided to accept more of it." My men roared with laughter. "Come," they cried, "thank him for that, farmer. Did you ever have such a lordly guest before?" I went on. "Now there is no fun in having guests, unless they keep you company and make you merry. So I will give out this law, that my men shall never leave you alone. Hakon there shall be your constant companion, friend farmer. He shall not leave you day or night, whether you are working or playing or sleeping. Leif and Grim shall be the same kind of friends to your 2 sons. I named 9 others and said, and these shall follow your thralls in the same way. Now, am I not careful to make your time go merrily? So I set guards over everyone in that house. Not once all that winter did they stir out of sight of some of us, so no tales got out to the neighbors. Besides, it was a lonely place, and by good luck no one came that way. Oh, that was fat and easy living. Well, after we had been there for a long time, Hakon came in to the feast one night and said, "I heard a cuckoo today." "It is the call to go a Viking," I said. All my men put their hands to their mouths and shouted. Their eyes danced. Big Thorleif stood up and stretched himself. "I am stiff with long sitting," he said. "I itch for a fight." I turned to the farmer. "This is our last feast with you," I said. "Well," he laughed, "this has been the busiest winter I ever spent, and the merriest. May good luck go with you." "By the bird of Odin," I cried, "you have taken our joke like a man." My men pounded the table with their fists. "By the hammer of Thor," shouted Grim, "here is no stinking coward. He is a man fit to carry my drinking horn, the horn of a sea robber and a sword swinger. Here, friend, take it." And he thrust it into the farmer's hand. "May your drink hearts ease from it for many years. And with it I leave you a name, Sif the Friendly. I shall hope to drink with you sometime in Valhalla." Then all my men poured around that farmer, and clapped him on the shoulder and piled things upon him, saying, "Here is a ring for Sif the Friendly, and here is a bracelet. A sword would not be ashamed to hang at your side." I took 5 great bracelets of gold from our treasure chest and gave them to him. The old man's eyes opened wide at all these things, and at the same time he laughed. "May Odin send me such guests every winter," he said. Early next morning we shook hands with our host and boarded a wave runner and sailed off. "Where shall we go?" my men asked. "Let the gods decide," I said, and tossed up my spear. When it fell on the deck it pointed upshore, so I steered in that direction. That is the best way to decide, for the spear will always point somewhere, and one thing is as good as another. That time it pointed us into your father's ships. They closed in battle with us and killed my men and sunk my ship and dragged me off a prisoner. They were 3 against 1, or they might have tasted something more bitter at our hands. They took me before King Halfdan. "Here," they said, "is a rascal who has been harrying our coasts. We sunk his ship and men, but him we brought to you." "A robber Viking?" said the king, and scowled at me. I threw back my head and laughed. "Yes, and with all your fingers it took you a year to catch me." The king frowned more angrily. "Saucy too," he said. "Well, thieves must die. Take him out, Torkel, and let him taste your sword." Your mother, the queen, was standing by. Now she put her hand on his arm and smiled and said, "He is only a lad. Let him live, and would he not be a good gift for our baby?" Your father thought a moment, then looked at your mother and smiled. "Soft heart," he said gently to her. Then to Torkel, "Well, let him go, Torkel." Then he turned to me again, frowning. "But, young Sharp-tongue, Now that we have caught you, we will put you into a trap that you cannot get out of. Weld an iron collar on his neck. So I lived, and now am your tooth thrall. Well, it is the luck of war, but by the share of Odin, I kept my vow. Yes, cried Harald, jumping to his feet, and had a joke into the bargain. Ah, sometime I will make a brave vow like that. End of Olaf's Farm by Jenny Hall, recorded by Hope for Swan.
Echo and Narcissus in A Book of Myths by Jean Lang. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Echo and Narcissus. In the solitudes of the hills we find her, and yet we may come on her unawares in the din of a noisy city. She will answer us where the waves are lashing themselves against the rugged cliffs of our own British coast, or we may find her where the great yellow pillars of fallen temples lie hot in the sun, close to the vivid blue water of the African Sea. At nightfall, on the lonely northern moors, she mimics the cry of a wailing bird that calls for its mate, but it is she who prolongs the roll of the great organ in a vast cathedral. She who repeats the rattle and crack and boom of the guns, no matter in what land the war may be raging. In the desolate Australian bush, she makes the crash of the falling limb of a dead gum tree go on, and tortures the human being who is lost, hopelessly lost, and facing a cruel death, by repeating his despairing calls for help. Through the night, in old country houses, she sports at will and gives life to sad old tales of the restless dead who restlessly walk. But she echoes the children's voices as they play by the seashore or pick primroses in the woods in spring, and when they greet her with laughter, she laughs in merry response. They may fear her when the sun has gone down, and when they are left all alone, they begin to dread her mockery. Yet the nymph who sought for love and failed to gain what she sought must surely find some comfort on those bright days of summer and of spring, when she gives the little children happiness and they give her their love. When all the world was young, and nymphs and fauns and dryads dwelt in the forests, there was no nymph more lovely and more gay than she whose name was Echo. Diana would smile on her for her fleetness of foot when she followed her in the chase, and those whom she met in the leafy pathways of the dim green woods would pass on smiling at the remembrance of her merry chatter and her tricksy humor. It was an evil day for Echo when she crossed the path of Hera, queen of the gods. The jealous goddess sought her errant husband, who was amusing himself with some nymphs, and Echo, full of mischievous glee, kept her in talk until the nymphs had fled to safety. Hera was furious indeed when she found out that a frolicsome nymph had dared to play on her such a trick, and ruthlessly she spoke fair Echo's doom. Henceforth, she said, the tongue with which thou hast cheated me shall be in bonds. No longer wilt thou have the power to speak in greeting. To the tongues of others shall thy tongue be slave, and from this day until time shall cease, thou shalt speak only to repeat the last words that have fallen on thine ears. A maimed nymph indeed was Echo then, yet whole in all that matters most, in that her merry heart was still her own. But only for a little while did this endure. Narcissus, the beautiful son of a nymph and a river god, was hunting in a lonely forest one day when Echo saw him pass. To her he seemed more fair than god or man, and once she had seen him, she knew that she must gain his love or die. From that day on she haunted him like his shadow, gliding from tree to tree, nestling down amongst thick fern and undergrowth, motionless as one who stalks a wild thing, watching him afar off while he rested, gladdening her eyes with his beauty. So did she feed her hungering heart and sought to find contentment by looking on his face each day. To her at length came a perfect moment when Narcissus was separated from his companions in the chase, and stopping suddenly where the evening sun checkered the pathway of the forest with black and gold, heard the nymph's soft footfall on the rustling leaves. "Who's here?" he called. "Here," answered Echo. Narcissus, peering amongst the trees' long shadows and seeing no one, called, "Come!" And "Come!" called the glad voice of Echo, while the nymph, with fast-beating heart, felt that her day of happiness had come indeed. "Why do you shun me?" then called Narcissus. "Why do you shun me?" Echo repeated. "Let us join one another," said the lad, and the simple words seemed turned into song when Echo said them over. "Let us join one another," she said, and not Eos herself, as with rosy fingers she turns aside the dark clouds of night, could be fairer than was the nymph as she pushed aside the leaves of the trackless wood, and ran forward with white arms outstretched to him who was lord of her life. With cold eyes and colder heart, the one she loved beheld her. "Away," he cried, shrinking back as if from something that he hated. "Away! I would rather die than that you should have me." "Have me," cried Echo pitifully, but she pled in vain. Narcissus had no love to give her, and his scorn filled her with shame. Thenceforth in the forest revels she never more was seen, and the nymphs danced gaily as ever, with never a care for her who had faded and gone away as completely as though she were a blossom in the passing of spring. In the solitude of mountain cliffs and caves and rocky places, and in the loneliest depths of the forest, Echo hid her grief, and when the winds blew through the dark branches of the trees at night, moaning and sighing, they could hear far below them the voice of Echo repeating their lamentations. For her, long nights followed hopeless days, and nights and days only told her that her love was all in vain. Then came a night when the winds no longer saw the figure of the nymph, white and frail as a broken flower, crouching close to the rocks they passed over. Grief had slain the body of Echo. Only her voice was left to repeat their mocking laughter, their wistful sighs, only her voice that lives on still, though all the old gods are gone, and but few there are who know her story. Heart-whole and happy, Narcissus, slayer of happiness, went on his way, and other nymphs besides fair Echo suffered from loving him in vain. One nymph, less gentle than Echo, poured the tale of her love that was scorned into the sympathetic ears of the goddess of love, and implored her to punish Narcissus. Hot and tired from the chase, Narcissus sought one day a lonely pool in the woods, there to rest and to quench his thirst. In some delicious ramble he had found a little space with boughs all woven round, and in the midst of all a clearer pool than e'er reflected in its pleasant cool, the blue sky here and there serenely peeping, through tendril wreaths fantastically creeping. As he stooped down to drink, a face looked at his through the crystal clear water, and a pair of beautiful eyes met his own. His surprise and joy at the sight of what he felt sure must be the most beautiful creature on earth was evidently shared by the nymph of the pool, who gazed fearlessly up at him. Round her head she had a nimbus of curls than which that of Adonis, nay, of the sun god himself, was not more perfect, while her eyes were like the brown pools of water in a rippling mountain stream, flecked with sunshine, yet with depths untold. When Narcissus smiled at her in rapture, her red lips also parted in a smile. He stretched out his arms towards her, and her arms were stretched to him. Almost trembling in his delight, he slowly stooped to kiss her. Nearer she drew to him, nearer still, but when his mouth would have given itself to that other mouth that was formed like the bow of Eros, a thing to slay hearts, only the chilly water of the pool touched his lips, and the thing of his delight vanished away. In passionate disappointment, Narcissus waited for her to return, and as soon as the water of the pool grew still, once more he saw her exquisite face gazing wistfully up into his. Passionately he pled with the beautiful creature, spoke of his love, besought her to have pity on him. But although the face in the pool reflected his every look of adoration and of longing, time and again he vainly tried to clasp in his arms what was but the mirrored likeness of himself. In full measure had the avenging goddess meted out to Narcissus the restless longing of unsatisfied love. By day and by night he haunted the forest pool, and ere long the face that looked back at his was pale as a lily in the dawn. When the moonbeams came straying down through the branches and all the night was still, they found him kneeling by the pool, and the white face that the water mirrored had the eyes of one of the things of the woods to which a huntsman has given a mortal wound. Mortally wounded he truly was, slain, like many another since his day, by a hopeless love for what was in truth but an image, and that an image of his own creation. Even when his shade passed across the dark Stygian river, it stooped over the side of the boat, that it might try to catch a glimpse of the beloved one in the inky waters. Echo and the other nymphs were avenged, yet when they looked on the beautiful dead Narcissus, they were filled with sorrow, and when they filled the air with their lamentations, most piteously did the voice of Echo repeat each mournful cry. Even the gods were pitiful, and when the nymphs would have burned the body on a funeral pyre, which their own fair hands had built for him, they sought it in vain. For the Olympians had turned Narcissus into a white flower, the flower that still bears his name and keeps his memory sweet. A lonely flower he spied, a meek and forlorn flower with naught of pride, drooping its beauty o'er the watery clearness, to woo its own sad image into nearness. Deaf to light's Zephyrus it would not move, but still would seem to droop, to pine, to love. Keats. End of Echo and Narcissus by Jean Lang.
Told on the Pagoda, Tales of Burma, The Woman, the Man, and the Knot by Mimosa, read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. In every large tree there lives a gnat, and it is a custom very strictly adhered to that before any tree can be touched, the permission of the spirit must be asked and obtained. Now a woodman cut down a tree one day without giving the gnat who resided in it the slightest warning, a proceeding which infuriated the spirit exceedingly, and he determined to be revenged. So, taking upon himself without delay the exact form and likeness of the woodman, he gathered up a bundle of sticks and went in advance of him to his home in the brief, warm gloom that precedes the fall of night. When he reached the hut, that was as bare as a hermit's cell, thatched with dewny leaves, and situated in one of the deepest recesses of the dense sylvan growth, he placed the wood outside and went within. An oil lamp stood on the wooden ledge of the entrance, and threw a faint light on all around. The wife of the woodcutter was busy boiling the evening rice. A baby slept in its box-like cradle slung from a beam in the roof. A little boy of 5 or 6 sat cutting plantain leaves. The gnat greeted the woman. She answered him cheerily. Then he squatted down on a piece of matting. The rice being ready, the wife put it out on the plantain leaves, giving one to her supposed husband, one to the boy, and keeping the other for herself. They ate together, and when they had finished drank some water from the chatty standing near. Then they sat and smoked, and talked together of the many little trifling events which went to make up their world. The woman cleared away the remains of their meal, and took out some beetle chews and commenced to roll them, while the child slept behind the purdah. About half an hour passed away, thus, when lo! On the stillness broke the voice of a woodman calling to his wife that he was coming, saying that he had been delayed. The woman heard in bewildered astonishment, then turned to the gnat, who apparently had not heeded the call, and asked him if she dreamt. Then rising, she peered out into the gloom, just faintly relieved by the rays of a young moon, and beheld the form of a woodcutter coming between the trees, identically the same in figure and face as her husband, who was there beside her. The newcomer called her by her name again, bidding her prepare something for him to eat, as he was tired and hungry. He threw the wood down that he carried and entered, but staggered back on seeing his counterpart squatting, quite at home, on the ground. The woman looked from one to the other, and knew not what to do or think. There was silence for a few moments. Then he who had come last asked, when he had sufficiently recovered himself to speak, "Who is this man who bears so strange a likeness to me?" "I am the husband of this woman," answered the gnat calmly, not even removing his green-leaf cigar from between his lips. "That cannot be," explained the other indignantly, "because I am he." The gnat shook his head, and went on smoking. The woodcutter, mad with anger and astonishment, turned excitedly to his wife and cried, "Do you not know me, I, your husband, who left you only this morning? Do you not know me, or do you forget so soon that you accept a stranger in my place?" The woman looked from one to the other, and examined each carefully, and was more puzzled than ever. "Oh, wife, do you not know me? Do you not know me?" moaned the woodman in a grief-stricken voice. The woman wrung her hands as she answered, "I don't know if you are my husband. You are both so much alike that I cannot tell." Then she broke down and wept, and the gnat, hearing, smiled where he sat in the shadows. After a while the woman dried her tears, smoothed back her heavy masses of black hair, and asked what was to be done. They neither of them answered. Then she said, "Let us go and seek Manu, and abide by what he says." Manu was a very learned judge who had been appointed, while still quite young, Chief Justice of the King's Court, and was renowned for the wise and prudent judgments that he invariably pronounced. The gnat objected to the proposition. Secretly he feared that Manu might perhaps guess his identity. But the woodman assented eagerly to the wife's idea, and between them they overcame the other's dislike, and the three started without delay, going through the forest between the silvered line of palm trees. The fireflies danced before them, and the bats flitted by like ghosts in the warm darkness. All that night and part of the next they traveled, until they reached the court of Manu, which was a large white building supported by chinemed pillars, and with many carved doors. The judge himself, magnificently arrayed, sat upon a raised couch that was covered with scarlet satin, richly embroidered, and with a heavy fringe of gold and jewels edging it. The woman, the gnat, and the woodman, leaving their shoes at the gates, entered, and seating themselves at a respectful distance on separate pieces of matting, told their tale. The judge listened in silence to the end. Then he asked the woman if her husband had any particular mark on him by which she could distinguish him. Her face lightened as she answered that he had a black mark on his back and a red scar on his knee. Then Manu had both men examined carefully, but found that each had the same marks in the same places. The woman became more hopelessly bewildered than ever, and knew not what to make of the extraordinary circumstance, while the judge found himself in a position of considerable difficulty. He saw that he would have to consider the matter carefully for some time, so he bade them go and return on the following day at the same hour. Then he went home to his house, which was a gift from his royal master, and was situated on a rocky promontory, with the sea rolling up almost to the entrance. Seating himself alone in his study, the windows of which looked out over the water to where a rich sunset glowed westward, edging the waves with freckled lustre, and throwing purple, amber, and azure lights over the white-crested waves. He became absorbed in deep thought, as a result of which he came to a solution of the matter. On the next day, therefore, when his three strange applicants presented themselves before him, he had a wooden wheel brought into the room and placed in the middle of the floor, saying at the same time, "The man who shall go through the hole in that wheel will be a wonderful man, and will be recognized as the real husband of this woman." On hearing which the woodman protested, saying that it was impossible for any human being to go through such a small space, that it was only large enough to admit of an arm, and he grumbled greatly, saying that the test was very unfair. But Manu bade him be patient and silent yet a while. Then he turned to the gnat, and asked him what he thought. The gnat, who was laughing inwardly, at once replied that he could perform the task that the woodcutter deemed impossible. The judge smiled a little complacently as he bade him do it. The gnat immediately went to and fro through the hole with the greatest ease, the woman looking on in speechless amaze. Then said Manu, "I suspected yesterday that you were no mortal, but a visitor from the gnat country, and now I am, of course, convinced of it." The gnat hung his head, and the judge proceeded, saying, "Why have you come from your own world, taking upon yourself this form and shape, thereby causing so much pain and unhappiness to two innocent people?" The gnat, seeing that he could no longer carry on his course of deception, answered, "In the season of the sun and in that of the rain, for a greater time than I can count, I have lived in a tree in the forest where this woodman comes every day. I troubled no one, and I was content till 2 days ago, when he felled my home to the ground with neither warning given to or permission asked of me. When other woodcutters have come, they have and do always crave permission of the gnat residing in the tree to take from it even one branch. Therefore you must see that I have had just cause to be angry." Manu then said that the woodman had certainly been wrong in the way he had acted. Then, turning to the woman, he directed her and her husband to hang up a dried coconut on the best side of their hut for the gnat to make his home in, an order which they promised to speedily obey. The gnat said that he was satisfied with that arrangement. Then the three, thanking the judge, withdrew and went homewards. From that time forth, all Burmese people hung, and still hang, dried coconut in their houses for the spirits to dwell in. End of The Woman, the Man, and the Knot by Mimosa.